Miss Arabella Thornfield had perfected the art of being invisible, watching from shadowed alcoves as her golden sister Cordelia enchanted every gentleman in London. So when Sebastian Blackwood, the Duke of Ashworth, fell desperately in love with Cordelia at first sight, Arabella buried her own tender feelings beneath layers of duty and resignation. She would help secure her sister's brilliant match, even as her heart shattered with each stolen glance, each meaningful conversation, each moment that revealed the Duke's true character. But when Arabella discovers Cordelia entwined with another man mere weeks before the wedding, whispering promises of love while planning to deceive Sebastian for his fortune, she faces an impossible choice: expose her sister's betrayal and destroy her family, or watch the man she secretly loves marry a woman who will break his heart. Sometimes the greatest act of love is allowing the truth to shatter everything, trusting that from the ruins something real might finally bloom. The crystal chandeliers of Almac's assembly rooms cast their familiar golden glow across the polished marble floors, where London's most illustrious families gathered for the season's most anticipated evening. Miss Arabella Thornfield occupied her customary position near the potted palms, a strategic location that afforded her an excellent view of the proceedings, while rendering her nearly invisible to the assembled company. At 22, she had perfected the art of social observation, watching with quiet resignation as gentlemen's eyes swept past her unremarkable form to seek more dazzling prospects elsewhere. Her chestnut hair, arranged in a simple chignon that her modest lady's maid could manage, caught none of the light that seemed drawn magnetically to her younger sister's golden locks. Arabella's hazel eyes, intelligent and thoughtful behind long lashes, held depths that society had never bothered to plumb, for in a world that measured worth by beauty and dowry, her extensive reading and facility with languages counted for nothing. The pale blue silk of her gown, carefully altered from last season to appear fresh, could not compete with the elaborate creations that adorned the season's diamonds, and she had long since ceased to hope it might. 4 seasons had taught her to find contentment in her role as observer rather than participant, though tonight she found herself studying the crowd with unusual melancholy. Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. Perhaps it was the knowledge that this would likely be her final season, for their father's modest fortune could not sustain much longer the expense of launching 2 daughters into society, and everyone understood, without speaking, that only one Thornfield sister could hope to marry advantageously. That sister stood at the room's glittering center, surrounded by a circle of admirers who seemed drawn to her luminous presence like moths to flame. Miss Cordelia Thornfield possessed the kind of ethereal beauty that poets struggled to capture in verse, with corn silk hair that caught the light in spun gold waves, sapphire eyes that sparkled with seeming innocence, and features so perfectly arranged they might have been carved by a master sculptor. At 19, she had been declared the season's diamond by no less an authority than Lady Jersey herself, and every eligible gentleman in London had paid court to her gentle smiles and musical laughter. Arabella watched her sister's performance with the appreciative eye of one who understood its artistry, for Cordelia had perfected the delicate balance of encouraging attention while maintaining proper reserve, of appearing sweetly naive while calculating precisely the effect of each gesture. The evening's rhythm had settled into its predictable pattern of minuets and country dances, with Arabella declining the occasional invitation from elderly gentlemen or young boys fulfilling their social obligations, when a ripple of excitement swept through the assembly like wind across a wheat field. His Grace, the Duke of Ashworth, appeared in the arched doorway with the natural authority of a man accustomed to deference, his tall figure commanding attention without apparent effort. Sebastian Blackwood possessed the kind of masculine beauty that made society mothers clutch their fans and eligible daughters practice their most becoming smiles, though at 9 and 20 he had shown little inclination to succumb to their various charms. His dark hair, perfectly arranged despite the evening's warmth, framed features that spoke of aristocratic breeding, tempered by an athletic life spent managing his vast estates rather than languishing in London's drawing rooms. Deep blue eyes, the colour of midnight seas, surveyed the assembly with intelligent interest, while his broad shoulders and tall frame moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin. Unlike many of his contemporaries who affected boredom or disdain for social gatherings, the Duke carried himself with genuine warmth, greeting acquaintances with sincere pleasure and treating even lesser-ranking individuals with courtesy that spoke well of his character. Arabella had observed him from afar during previous seasons, noting the way he listened attentively when others spoke, the manner in which he treated servants with respect, and the genuine smile that transformed his handsome features when something truly amused him. She had also noted, with a mixture of admiration and resignation, that he had shown no particular interest in any of the eligible young ladies paraded before him, maintaining a polite but distant demeanour that had earned him the reputation of being discerning to a fault. Tonight, however, something had changed, for his gaze swept the room with purposeful intent before settling with unmistakable interest upon the golden vision that was Cordelia Thornfield. The moment their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, the very air seemed to shimmer with possibility, and Arabella felt her heart contract with a pain she had no right to feel. She watched as Sebastian moved through the crowd with determined grace, his path cutting directly toward her sister's circle of admirers, who parted with varying degrees of reluctance to allow the Duke access to their prize. Lord Pemberton, who had been regaling Cordelia with tales of his latest hunting expedition, fell silent mid-sentence as Sebastian approached, while young Mr. Whitmore actually stepped backward to make room for his social superior. The introduction, performed by their hostess Lady Cowper with obvious delight at facilitating such a promising connection, crackled with immediate chemistry that even Arabella could perceive from her distant observation post. "Your Grace, may I present Miss Cordelia Thornfield?" Lady Cowper announced, with the satisfaction of a matchmaker sensing success. "Miss Thornfield, His Grace, the Duke of Ashworth." Cordelia's curtsy was perfection itself, a graceful descent that showcased both her elegant bearing and the becoming flush that rose to her cheeks as Sebastian bowed over her gloved hand. "Miss Thornfield," he said, his deep voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush that had fallen over their immediate vicinity. "I confess I have been hoping for this introduction since entering the room. Your reputation for beauty has not been exaggerated, though I suspect it fails to encompass your other accomplishments." The pretty compliment, delivered with apparent sincerity, brought a musical laugh from Cordelia that seemed to enchant not only Sebastian, but every gentleman within hearing. "Your Grace is too kind," she replied with exactly the right degree of modest pleasure. "Though I fear my accomplishments are quite ordinary. I play the pianoforte indifferently, speak a little French, and embroider well enough not to disgrace my mother's teaching." "Surely you underestimate yourself," Sebastian responded, his blue eyes never leaving her face. "Beauty such as yours is rarely unaccompanied by other graces, and I would count myself fortunate to discover them through better acquaintance." The conversation continued in this vein, with Cordelia displaying the flirtatious innocence she had perfected over the season, while Sebastian showed every sign of genuine infatuation. Arabella observed their interaction with the detached fascination of a naturalist studying exotic specimens, noting how her sister managed to appear both worldly and naive, sophisticated yet charmingly unspoiled. It was a masterful performance, one that had already captured numerous hearts, but never before had Arabella seen it affect a gentleman of Sebastian's apparent depth and intelligence. When the orchestra struck up the opening notes of a waltz, Sebastian's request for the honor of the dance was made with such gallant formality that even the most critical observers could find no fault with the proceedings. As the Duke led Cordelia on to the floor, their figures moving in perfect harmony to the lilting melody, Arabella retreated further into the shadows of her corner, her chest tight with an emotion she dared not name. They made a stunning couple, the golden beauty and the dark-haired Duke, drawing admiring glances from every corner of the ballroom as they glided through the intimate steps of the waltz with natural grace. Sebastian's attention never wavered from Cordelia's face, his expression holding an intensity that spoke of genuine fascination rather than mere social courtesy. While Cordelia gazed up at him with apparent breathless wonder that would have convinced the most skeptical observer of her sincere attraction. From her position among the chaperones, Arabella found herself in conversation with Lady Catherine Blackwood, Sebastian's sister, who had approached with the easy confidence of a woman secure in her social position. Lady Catherine possessed an intelligent countenance and warm brown eyes that seemed to see more than most, and her manner toward Arabella held none of the condescension that typically characterized such interactions. "Miss Thornfield," she said, settling beside Arabella with genuine interest, "I confess I have been hoping to make your acquaintance. My brother mentioned meeting you briefly at Lady Whitworth's musicale last month, and he was quite impressed with your observations about Mr. Mozart's later compositions." Arabella felt a flutter of surprise that Sebastian had remembered their brief exchange, much less thought it worth mentioning to his sister. "Your Grace is too kind," she replied. "I fear I spoke too freely about musical theory, a subject that rarely interests others in social settings." "On the contrary," Lady Catherine assured her, "I find such conversations infinitely more engaging than discussions of the weather or the latest fashions. Sebastian shares my appreciation for intelligent discourse, though he finds precious little of it in most social gatherings. Tell me, what did you think of Miss Burney's recent novel? I understand it addresses some rather progressive ideas about women's education." The question sparked a discussion that continued through the remainder of the waltz, with Lady Catherine proving to be as intelligent and well-read as her brother's reputation suggested. Arabella found herself relaxing in the company of someone who valued her thoughts rather than merely tolerating her presence, and the conversation ranged from literature to philosophy with an ease she rarely experienced in social settings. When Sebastian returned Cordelia to their group, his face flushed with exertion and obvious pleasure, he immediately sought his sister's eyes in a silent communication that spoke of long understanding between siblings. "Lady Catherine," he said warmly, "I see you have discovered what I suspected about Miss Arabella Thornfield. Her mind is as admirable as her sister's beauty." The casual compliment, delivered without apparent calculation, sent an unexpected warmth through Arabella's chest, even as she recognized it for the polite observation it surely was. As the evening continued, Sebastian remained attentive to Cordelia, while occasionally including Arabella in their conversations, his manner suggesting the kind of courteous inclusion one might show to a favored friend's relative. When the time came for their departure, he requested permission to call upon the family the following afternoon, his intentions toward Cordelia unmistakably serious, despite the brief nature of their acquaintance. Arabella accepted his bow with perfect composure, congratulating herself on maintaining her dignity even as her heart began the long process of breaking for a man she could never hope to win. The morning following the Almack's ball dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight streaming through the tall windows of the Thornfield drawing-room as Arabella arranged the last of the garden roses in a crystal vase. She had risen early, unable to sleep after the previous evening's revelations, and sought solace in the familiar routine of managing their modest household. The roses, gathered from their small garden before the frost could claim them, seemed to mock her with their beauty, their petals unfurling in shades of pink and gold that reminded her inevitably of Cordelia's luminous complexion. As she stepped back to admire her handiwork, the sound of carriage wheels on cobblestones sent her heart into an irregular rhythm, for she knew without looking that Sebastian had arrived for his promised call. Their butler, elderly Hartwell, who had served the family since before Arabella's birth, appeared in the doorway with the formal announcement that His Grace the Duke of Ashworth requested an audience, his weathered face betraying none of the excitement that surely coursed through the household at receiving such an elevated visitor. Cordelia descended the stairs like a vision in pale yellow muslin, her golden hair caught up in an artfully simple arrangement that had required her maid's careful attention for the better part of an hour. The color brought out the deep blue of her eyes and lent her skin a porcelain glow that seemed almost otherworldly in the morning light, and Arabella felt the familiar stab of inadequacy as she smoothed her own simple morning dress of lavender wool. When Sebastian entered their modest drawing-room, his presence seemed to fill the space with masculine energy that made their delicate furnishings appear almost fragile by comparison. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in any setting, his dark blue coat perfectly tailored to showcase his broad shoulders, his buff pantaloons and gleaming hessians, speaking of wealth worn without ostentation. The bouquet of hothouse flowers he carried, clearly chosen with care from his own conservatories, put Arabella's garden roses to shame with their exotic perfection, and she watched as he presented them to Cordelia with the gallant manner of a knight offering tribute to his lady. "Your Grace," Cordelia breathed, accepting the flowers with a becoming blush that appeared entirely natural despite its careful cultivation. "You are too generous. These are exquisite." "I feared my poor garden varieties would pale beside such beauties," Sebastian replied, his blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that made Arabella look away, though I confess nothing could overshadow the beauty of their recipient. The compliment, delivered with apparent sincerity, brought a musical laugh from Cordelia that seemed to enchant Sebastian anew, and Arabella busied herself with rearranging her roses to hide the pain that threatened to show in her expression. As the weeks that followed established a pattern, Sebastian's visits became a regular feature of their household routine, his presence transforming their quiet drawing-room into a stage for the elaborate dance of courtship that society demanded. Cordelia received his attentions with the grace of one accustomed to adoration, her manner suggesting both pleasure in his company and confidence in her power to hold his interest. She displayed her accomplishments with calculated spontaneity, playing the pianoforte with competent sweetness when he expressed interest in music, speaking French phrases with pretty hesitation when conversation turned to continental matters, and offering opinions on literature that revealed her education without suggesting any dangerous depth of thought. Sebastian appeared genuinely charmed by these performances, his attention rarely wavering from Cordelia's lovely face, except when politeness demanded he include Arabella in their conversations. As Cordelia's unofficial chaperone, a role that fell to her naturally, given their mother's delicate health and their father's preoccupation with estate matters, Arabella found herself present for most of these encounters, a silent witness to the growing attachment between the Duke and her sister. The torture of proximity began to work its insidious magic, as Sebastian's frequent presence allowed Arabella to observe the true depth of his character beneath the polished veneer of aristocratic breeding. Unlike many gentlemen of his rank who treated servants as invisible fixtures, Sebastian acknowledged each member of their household staff with genuine courtesy, remembering Hartwell's name from previous visits and inquiring after the health of their cook when she sent particularly fine refreshments. His manner toward their young housemaid, who tended to stumble over her words in the presence of such grandeur, held patience and kindness that spoke well of his treatment of those beneath his social station. Arabella noticed how he listened attentively when Cordelia spoke, asking thoughtful questions that encouraged her to elaborate on her thoughts, and she observed the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when something genuinely amused him rather than merely meeting social expectations. During one particular afternoon, when Cordelia had stepped away to fetch her embroidery, Sebastian's gaze fell upon the book Arabella had hastily set aside at his arrival, and his expression brightened with unmistakable interest. "Miss Arabella," he said, moving closer to examine the volume, "I see you are reading Mr. Wordsworth's latest collection. I confess myself curious about your opinion of his departure from traditional verse forms." The question, posed with genuine interest rather than polite conversation, sent an unexpected thrill through Arabella's chest, even as she reminded herself that such attention meant nothing beyond courteous inclusion. "I find his celebration of common experience rather refreshing," she replied carefully, "though I suspect many consider his style too simple for serious poetry. His ability to find profound meaning in ordinary moments speaks to me, perhaps because my own life consists largely of such commonplace observations." Sebastian's expression grew thoughtful as he considered her words, and when he responded, his voice held the warmth of someone discovering an unexpected treasure. "I believe you underestimate the value of such observations, Miss Arabella. The ability to perceive beauty and meaning in everyday experience suggests a depth of understanding that many lack entirely. Mr. Wordsworth would count you among his ideal readers, I suspect." Their conversation continued for several minutes, ranging from poetry to philosophy, with an ease that surprised them both, until Cordelia's return brought Sebastian's attention immediately back to his intended bride. Such moments became increasingly frequent as Sebastian's courtship progressed, brief interludes of intellectual connection that left Arabella both treasured and tormented. When Cordelia professed herself puzzled by a passage in French that Sebastian had quoted, Arabella provided the translation with quiet competence, earning his grateful acknowledgement and a look of something approaching respect. When their conversation touched upon political matters that bored Cordelia into distraction, Sebastian found himself addressing his more complex observations to Arabella, whose thoughtful responses revealed an understanding of current affairs that surprised him with its insight and nuance. The growing frequency of these intellectual exchanges created a dangerous intimacy that Arabella fought to resist even as she treasured each moment of genuine connection. She began to understand that Sebastian's mind was as attractive as his person, his thoughts ranging far beyond the typical concerns of fashionable society to encompass genuine interest in the welfare of his tenants, the changing social order following Napoleon's defeat, and the moral questions raised by England's expanding empire. His observations revealed a man grappling seriously with the responsibilities of his position, someone who viewed his wealth and rank as obligations to be fulfilled rather than privileges to be enjoyed. When he spoke of implementing new agricultural techniques on his estates to improve crop yields for his tenant farmers, or described his efforts to establish schools in his villages, Arabella saw a depth of character that made her earlier attraction seem shallow by comparison. Cordelia, meanwhile, received these revelations of Sebastian's serious nature with pretty bewilderment, clearly finding such topics tedious compared to discussions of fashion, gossip, or social events. Her responses to his more thoughtful observations consisted largely of admiring agreement, delivered with charming smiles. And while Sebastian accepted these reactions with good humor, Arabella noticed subtle signs of disappointment in his expression when conversations took shallow turns. She began to observe a pattern in Cordelia's behavior that troubled her increasingly as the weeks passed. Secure in Sebastian's obvious infatuation and confident in her beauty's power to hold his attention, Cordelia began to take his devotion for granted in ways that seemed designed to test his attachment. When other gentlemen called during Sebastian's visits, she received their compliments with obvious pleasure, laughing at their jokes with more enthusiasm than Sebastian's wit typically inspired. During social gatherings, she danced with multiple partners while Sebastian waited patiently for his turn, her manner suggesting she viewed his patient attention as tribute owed rather than favor granted. Most troubling of all, she began to speak of Sebastian to others in terms that emphasized his wealth and position rather than any personal attachment, referring to him as the Duke rather than by name, and discussing their potential future with calculation that chilled Arabella's heart. These behaviors puzzled Sebastian without yet alarming him, his natural generosity leading him to attribute Cordelia's apparent fickleness to youthful high spirits rather than calculated manipulation. When Arabella gently suggested that Cordelia might show more particular attention to Sebastian given the serious nature of his courtship, her sister laughed off such concerns with airy confidence. "Bella, darling," she said, using the childhood nickname that always preceded her most dismissive pronouncements. "You worry far too much about everything. Sebastian is utterly besotted with me, as any fool can see. A little mystery and independence only makes a woman more desirable. I have no intention of becoming a simpering miss who hangs upon his every word when I can command his attention through more interesting means." The family excursion to Richmond Park that Sebastian proposed for the first fine day of October seemed designed by fate to torture Arabella's already strained composure. The morning dawned crisp and clear, with autumn painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson that rivaled Cordelia's beauty as she appeared dressed in a walking costume of deep green wool that complemented her coloring to perfection. Sebastian arrived with a well-appointed carriage and pair of matched bays that spoke of his consideration for their comfort, and his manner toward their parents showed the respect and warmth of a suitor confident in his welcome. Sir Edmund, clearly gratified by such distinguished attention to his family, expanded under Sebastian's courteous inquiries about estate management, while Lady Thornfield, emerging from her usual delicate retirement for such an occasion, basked in the reflected glory of her daughter's conquest. The journey through London's bustling streets to the pastoral beauty of Richmond passed pleasantly, with Cordelia entertaining Sebastian with animated observations about the changing scenery, while Arabella maintained her customary role as interested observer. Upon reaching their destination, the party dispersed according to inclination and propriety, with Sir Edmund and Lady Thornfield settling beneath a spreading oak to enjoy the unseasonably warm sunshine, while Cordelia immediately attracted a circle of other young people who had come to enjoy the fine weather. Sebastian found himself somewhat abandoned as Cordelia became engrossed in conversation with Lieutenant Morrison, a dashing cavalry officer whose recent return from the peninsula had made him the object of considerable feminine interest. Rather than competing for her attention, Sebastian approached Arabella, who had wandered toward the river's edge to observe the changing colors reflected in its gentle current. The sight of him approaching sent her heart into irregular rhythm, but she maintained her composure as he joined her contemplation of the peaceful scene. "Miss Arabella," he said, his voice holding genuine pleasure, "I find myself grateful for this opportunity to enjoy your company without the distractions of formal calling. Your observations about society and human nature have provided some of the most thoughtful conversations I have enjoyed in recent memory." The compliment, delivered with apparent sincerity, brought warmth to Arabella's cheeks even as she reminded herself not to read too much significance into mere courtesy. "Your Grace is kind to say so," she replied carefully, "though I fear my thoughts are rather too serious for most social occasions. I have observed that people generally prefer lighter topics for entertainment." "On the contrary," Sebastian responded, falling into step beside her as they began to walk along the river path. "I find such conversations infinitely more valuable than discussions of weather and fashion." Tell me, what do you make of the changes we are witnessing in society since Napoleon's defeat? Do you believe the social order will remain stable? Or must we expect continued upheaval as common soldiers return to civilian life with new expectations? The question revealed his trust in her intelligence and sparked a discussion that carried them along the winding path for nearly an hour. Arabella found herself speaking with unusual freedom about her observations of the returning veterans in their village, the economic pressures facing agricultural communities, and the moral questions raised by England's treatment of its former enemies. Sebastian listened with genuine attention, his responses revealing a depth of thought and concern for social justice that made her earlier admiration seem pale by comparison. When their conversation turned to his own efforts to address these challenges on his estates, she heard passion in his voice that spoke of genuine commitment to using his position for the betterment of others, rather than mere personal aggrandizement. Their extended absence was noted by the rest of the party when they returned to find Cordelia holding court among no fewer than 5 gentlemen, her laughter ringing across the meadow as she encouraged their various attempts to win her attention. Sebastian's expression grew thoughtful as he observed this scene, and Arabella felt a stab of protective anger toward her sister's thoughtless behavior, even as she recognized the justice of Cordelia's position as an unattached young woman free to receive all appropriate attention. The remainder of the afternoon passed in similar fashion, with Sebastian dividing his time between proper courtship of Cordelia and meaningful conversation with Arabella, who found herself both treasuring and dreading each moment of his company. As evening approached and they prepared for their return journey, Sebastian requested a private word with Sir Edmund, and Arabella knew, without being told, that he intended to formalize his courtship with a request for serious consideration of his suit. The knowledge that her sister's future was about to be secured filled her with appropriate happiness, even as her own heart prepared to break completely. When the gentlemen rejoined the ladies, Sir Edmund's pleased expression and Cordelia's triumphant smile confirmed what Arabella had anticipated, and she offered her congratulations with sincere warmth that masked the desolation spreading through her chest. The journey home passed in a blur of excited conversation about wedding plans and future arrangements, with Sebastian's obvious happiness providing the final blow to Arabella's carefully maintained composure. That night, alone in her chamber, she finally allowed herself to weep for the future that had never been possible, grieving not just for her own loss, but for the growing certainty that Sebastian's generous heart was about to be placed in unworthy hands. The change in Cordelia's behavior began subtly, like the first hairline cracks in fine porcelain that grow imperceptibly until they threaten the entire structure. As autumn deepened into winter, and Sebastian's intentions became increasingly clear to all who observed his devoted attendance, Cordelia's careful performance began to slip in ways that filled Arabella with growing unease. The sweet compliance that had initially charmed Sebastian gave way to moments of petulance when her wishes were not immediately gratified, while her practiced humility transformed into a sense of entitlement that showed itself in small but telling ways. Where once she had thanked their servants graciously for their efforts, she now spoke to them with the imperious tone of one who considered service her natural due, criticizing their housemaids' cleaning with sharp words that brought tears to the girls' eyes, and dismissing their cook's best efforts with complaints that would have been unthinkable during the early days of Sebastian's courtship. Arabella watched these transformations with horror, recognizing in her sister's behavior the emergence of a nature that had been carefully concealed beneath layers of artificial sweetness and calculated charm. Most troubling of all was Cordelia's increasing willingness to speak harshly of others, particularly young ladies whose circumstances or appearance failed to meet her exacting standards, as though Sebastian's obvious preference for her had granted license to pass judgment on those less fortunate. When Mrs. Whitmore brought her daughter Caroline to call one afternoon, Cordelia's reception of the girl's modest dress and shy manner revealed a cruelty that made Arabella's cheeks burn with shame for her sister's behavior. Poor Caroline, who could not have been more than 17 and clearly suffered from painful self-consciousness about her family's reduced circumstances, became the target of Cordelia's subtle but devastating observations about the challenges facing young ladies who lacked proper guidance in matters of fashion and deportment. Sebastian, present for this uncomfortable display, grew visibly tense as Cordelia's comments grew more pointed, his blue eyes seeking Arabella's face with an expression that seemed to ask for explanation or reassurance she could not provide. The afternoon reached its nadir when Cordelia, emboldened by what she perceived as Sebastian's silent approval, made a particularly cutting remark about Caroline's unfortunate choice of fabric, observing with false sympathy that provincial shops simply could not provide the quality materials necessary for truly elegant attire. The comment struck its target with devastating accuracy, bringing such obvious pain to the girl's face that even Mrs. Whitmore's maternal composure cracked momentarily before she rallied to defend her daughter with dignity that shamed Cordelia's cruelty by comparison. Arabella, unable to bear the sight of such unprovoked malice, smoothly intervened by redirecting the conversation toward Caroline's evident skill at watercolors, praising recent work she had observed, and drawing the girl into discussion of artistic techniques that allowed her natural intelligence to shine through her painful shyness. Sebastian's expression, when their eyes met briefly during this rescue, held gratitude mixed with something that might have been disappointment, and Arabella felt her heart contract with the knowledge that he was beginning to see beneath Cordelia's beautiful facade to the less appealing truth beneath. The pattern established that afternoon repeated itself with increasing frequency as winter social events brought the family into company with a broader circle of acquaintances, and Cordelia's sense of security in Sebastian's attachment seemed to license increasingly bold displays of her true character. At Lady Pemberton's musicale, she made disparaging remarks about Miss Fletcher's performance that were audible to other guests, while at the Ashfords' card party, she criticized their refreshments with observations that clearly pained their hostess. Sebastian's discomfort during these episodes became increasingly apparent to Arabella, though Cordelia herself seemed oblivious to the change in his manner toward her displays of superiority. Where once his attention to her words had been rapt and admiring, now Arabella noticed him glancing away when Cordelia launched into criticism of others, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly when her observations grew particularly harsh. Most telling of all was his tendency to seek Arabella's eyes during these moments, as though looking for confirmation that he was not imagining the cruelty he witnessed, and she found herself torn between loyalty to her sister and horror at defending behavior she could not condone. The evening that brought matters to a crisis occurred during a family dinner Sebastian attended as their most honored guest, an occasion that their mother had arranged with particular care to showcase Cordelia at her most accomplished. The meal proceeded smoothly until conversation turned to the recent engagement of Miss Sophia Hartwell to Mr. James Sinclair, a match that had surprised society given the disparity in their fortunes and social positions. Cordelia, perhaps emboldened by the wine their father had brought up from his carefully hoarded cellar in Sebastian's honor, launched into an analysis of the couple that revealed both her calculating nature and her fundamental lack of compassion for others' circumstances. Poor Sophia must be quite desperate indeed to accept such an offer, she declared with false sympathy that fooled no one at the table. Mr. Sinclair is pleasant enough, I suppose, but his income can barely support a modest household, and everyone knows his family lost their estate through poor management. I cannot imagine what she sees in him beyond the necessity of securing any establishment, however humble, rather than face the spectre of spinsterhood. The observations, delivered with careless cruelty that took no account of Arabella's own unmarried state or their family's own modest circumstances, created an uncomfortable silence that stretched painfully before Sebastian responded with careful control. Perhaps Miss Hartwell sees in Mr. Sinclair qualities that matter more than fortune or social position. I have found him to be a gentleman of excellent character and genuine principle, virtues that might well outweigh material considerations for a lady of discernment. His defense of the absent couple, delivered with pointed emphasis that should have warned Cordelia against further commentary, instead seemed to encourage her to press her advantage with observations that revealed the full extent of her mercenary nature. "Oh, Your Grace," she laughed with tinkling brightness that grated against the tension in the room. "Surely you cannot believe that sincere attachment could flourish under such unpromising circumstances. Love may be a pretty sentiment for novels, but practical considerations must govern real decisions about marriage. A woman who accepts poverty for the sake of romantic feeling will find herself quite thoroughly disillusioned when reality intrudes upon her dreams." Sebastian's expression grew thunderous at this pronouncement, and Arabella saw him struggle visibly with his response before choosing his words with dangerous precision. "I believe, Miss Cordelia, that you underestimate both the power of genuine affection and the value of character over circumstance. Some considerations matter far more than material comfort, and the woman who recognizes this possesses a wisdom that outweighs any financial calculation." The rebuke, though delivered with perfect courtesy, rang clearly through the dining room and brought a flush of anger to Cordelia's cheeks that she barely managed to conceal behind her fan. Arabella hastily intervened to smooth over the moment by agreeing with Sebastian's assessment, while gently redirecting conversation toward safer topics. But the damage had been done, and the remainder of the evening passed with strained politeness that satisfied no one. When Sebastian took his leave, his bow to Cordelia held none of its former warmth, while his farewell to Arabella carried an intensity that left her pulse racing long after his departure. That night, as she helped her sister prepare for bed, Cordelia's fury at what she perceived as Sebastian's unreasonable criticism exploded in a torrent of complaints that revealed depths of selfishness that shocked even Arabella's prepared defenses. "How dare he presume to lecture me about romance and sentiment?" Cordelia raged as her maid removed the pins from her golden hair. "His attachment to me is obvious to everyone, yet he chooses to criticize my perfectly reasonable observations about practical matters that any sensible person must acknowledge. If he thinks to reform my character according to his own peculiar notions, he will find himself quite mistaken about my willingness to be molded according to his preferences. I am what I am, and he must accept me as such, or seek his philosophical discussions elsewhere." The words chilled Arabella's heart with their casual dismissal of Sebastian's legitimate concerns, but before she could formulate a response that might encourage her sister toward greater self-reflection, their mother appeared in the doorway with an expression that brooked no argument about the urgency of her mission. "We must speak immediately," she announced in tones that sent both sisters into immediate attention. "This situation requires careful management if we are to avoid disaster." Lady Margaret Thornfield, despite her reputation for delicate health and withdrawal from society's demands, possessed a sharp intelligence when her family's interests were at stake, and she had observed the evening's proceedings with the calculating eye of a general assessing battlefield conditions. As Cordelia's maid was dismissed and the door closed firmly against interruption, their mother's manner transformed from social invalid to military strategist with efficiency that revealed the steel beneath her fragile facade. "Cordelia," she began without preamble, "your behavior tonight bordered on catastrophic, and if you continue in this vein, you will lose Sebastian's regard entirely before he can be brought to the point of a formal proposal. His attachment to you, while strong, is not so unshakable that it cannot be damaged by repeated displays of the character you showed this evening. I have watched his expressions during your various pronouncements, and I assure you that his growing discomfort is not merely aristocratic sensibility, but genuine disappointment in what he perceives as your true nature. The criticism, delivered with brutal directness that left Cordelia speechless with shock, continued as their mother outlined the precarious nature of their situation with mathematical precision. "Our circumstances require that this match be secured without delay," she explained with the ruthless clarity that desperation had brought to her assessment of their options. "Your father's investments have proven less successful than anticipated, and without a substantial alliance we face the very real possibility of losing this house and the respectability that our position in society requires. You have been given advantages that many young ladies would sacrifice anything to possess, and you will not waste them through careless display of your less attractive qualities until after Sebastian has committed himself irrevocably to your future denouement." The conversation that followed revealed the full extent of their family's financial difficulties and the calculated nature of their mother's strategy for securing Sebastian's proposal before his growing doubts could crystallize into withdrawal. Lady Margaret had observed Sebastian's increasing attention to Arabella's company and conversation, and while she dismissed any romantic implications to this preference, she recognized the danger it represented to their carefully laid plans. Her solution involved a campaign designed to force Sebastian's hand through strategic deployment of opportunity and social pressure, beginning with arrangements that would leave him alone with Cordelia under circumstances that courtesy would require him to formalize his intentions. Arabella listened to these machinations with growing horror, recognizing in her mother's strategy the same calculating nature that had begun to emerge in Cordelia's behavior, and she began to understand that her sister's transformation might be less aberration than family characteristic finally revealed under pressure. When their mother's attention turned to her with expectations that made her stomach clench with dread, Arabella realized that her own role in this campaign was to be that of unwilling accomplice to her sister's deception. "Your particular responsibility, Arabella," Lady Margaret announced with the authority of one accustomed to obedience, "will be to encourage Sebastian's attachment to Cordelia through whatever means necessary, including the sacrifice of your own comfort and any personal feelings that might interfere with family duty. I have observed your interactions with His Grace, and while I do not suggest any impropriety in your conduct, I have noticed that he seeks your company and conversation with frequency that must be redirected toward appropriate channels. You will discourage his tendency toward intellectual discussion with you, and instead guide such conversations toward topics that showcase Cordelia's accomplishments and character. Furthermore, you will speak to Sebastian about Cordelia's many admirable qualities whenever opportunity presents itself, ensuring that any doubts he might be developing are countered by testimony to her virtue and worthiness." The command, delivered with cold certainty that brooked no argument, struck Arabella like a physical blow as she recognized the full extent of the deception she was being asked to perpetuate. Her mother's awareness of her feelings for Sebastian, revealed through casual observations that suggested long surveillance, added humiliation to the pain of being commanded to actively promote his attachment to another. When she attempted to protest that such manipulation seemed dishonorable to all parties involved, Lady Margaret's response revealed the desperation that drove their family's actions with clarity that left no room for romantic scruples or moral objections. "Honor is a luxury we can no longer afford," her mother stated with finality that ended all discussion. "Your sister's future and this family's survival depend upon securing this alliance, and you will do your duty regardless of any personal cost to yourself. Whatever feelings you may harbor for Sebastian must be buried in favor of family loyalty, and you will remember that your own prospects depend entirely upon Cordelia's successful establishment in society. Any interference with these plans, whether intentional or through misguided sentiment, will be considered betrayal of your family obligations and treated accordingly." The morning of Lady Catherine's garden party dawned with the crystalline clarity that often follows autumn storms, as though nature itself had conspired to provide the perfect backdrop for the momentous events Lady Margaret had orchestrated with military precision. The Blackwood Estate Gardens, transformed by careful preparation into a vision of refined elegance, welcomed London's most distinguished families beneath a canopy of gold and crimson leaves that rustled with prophetic whispers in the gentle breeze. Arabella stood beside her sister near the ornamental fountain, watching Cordelia's performance reach its carefully calculated crescendo as she received the admiring attention of assembled guests with the practiced grace of an actress taking final bows. The pale rose silk of Cordelia's gown caught the afternoon light like spun gold, while the sapphire necklace that had belonged to their grandmother added exactly the right note of understated elegance to suggest both breeding and modesty that masked the calculating ambition beneath. Sebastian approached their small group with the measured steps of a man carrying the weight of momentous decision, his dark blue coat and pristine linen speaking of preparation for an occasion of supreme importance, though his expression held none of the eager anticipation that should have characterized a gentleman about to claim his heart's desire. Lady Catherine, observing from her strategic position near the rose arbor, caught Arabella's eye with a look that seemed to communicate both sympathy and warning, as though Sebastian's sister had divined the true state of affairs, despite their careful concealment from the rest of society. When Sebastian requested the honor of a private word with Cordelia, his formal tone carried the gravity of ritual rather than the warmth of genuine emotion, and Arabella felt her heart begin its final descent into the abyss of permanent loss. Their withdrawal to the secluded bower that Lady Catherine had prepared with strategic positioning allowed for privacy while maintaining proper visibility, and Arabella found herself trembling as she watched from afar the scene that would seal both their fates with irreversible finality. Sebastian's proposal, when it came, followed all the prescribed forms with clockwork precision, his words carrying the weight of duty and social expectation, even as his voice lacked the passionate conviction that should have marked such a declaration. "Miss Cordelia," he began with careful formality that suggested rehearsal rather than spontaneous emotion, "these past months have convinced me that you possess all the qualities I could desire in a wife, and I would be honored if you would consent to become my Duchess. Your beauty, accomplishments, and gentle nature have captured my complete admiration, and I believe our union would bring happiness to us both while fulfilling the expectations of our families and society." The proposal, while technically correct in every particular, struck Arabella's ears with the hollow ring of obligation rather than love, and she watched in fascination and horror as Cordelia received this declaration with triumphant joy that revealed nothing of romantic feeling but everything of ambition satisfied. "Oh, Sebastian," she breathed with practiced breathlessness that suggested overwhelming emotion while maintaining perfect composure, "you honor me beyond my wildest dreams. To become your Duchess, to share your life and position, represents the fulfillment of every hope I have cherished since our first meeting. I accept your proposal with complete happiness and the promise to be worthy of the distinction you offer." Her response, while appropriately grateful, contained undertones that made Arabella's blood run cold with their implications. For even in this moment of supposed romantic triumph, Cordelia's first thoughts turned immediately to material considerations rather than emotional connection. As Sebastian placed his grandmother's ring upon her finger, with ceremony that satisfied all observers of their distant tableau, Cordelia's whispered questions revealed the true direction of her interests with clarity that would have shocked him had he possessed sufficient experience with feminine calculation to interpret their significance. "Tell me, my darling Duke," she murmured with seeming shyness that masked avid curiosity. "What income may I expect to manage as your Duchess, And what precedence will I take in society? I confess myself quite overwhelmed by the responsibilities of my new position, and long to understand how I may best fulfill your expectations while maintaining the dignity appropriate to our station. The celebration that followed Sebastian's announcement to the assembled guests created a whirlwind of congratulations and social ritual that left Arabella feeling as though she were drowning in a sea of false felicitations and envious observations from those who recognized the magnitude of Cordelia's social triumph. Lady Jersey herself pronounced the match a brilliant example of beauty and rank united in perfect harmony, while Mrs. Drummond Burrell observed with acid sweetness that some young ladies possessed remarkable talent for securing advantages that others might pursue in vain for entire seasons. Through the endless parade of well-wishers and social commentary, Arabella maintained her composure with the desperate control of someone walking across thin ice, accepting congratulations on her sister's good fortune with appropriate warmth, while dying slowly inside with each expression of admiration for Cordelia's remarkable achievement. The cruel irony of her position as sister to the bride-elect required her to appear delighted by an engagement that shattered her own heart while tying the man she loved to a woman who viewed him as nothing more than a particularly valuable acquisition. Sebastian, meanwhile, moved through the celebration with the mechanical grace of an automaton, accepting congratulations with appropriate gratitude while his eyes sought Arabella's face with increasing frequency, as though her presence provided the only anchor of genuine feeling in a sea of artificial emotion. When the formal toasts had been offered and the engagement ring admired by every female present, Sebastian found himself drawn to Arabella's quiet presence with the inexorable pull of a compass needle seeking true north, and their conversation took on an intimacy that would have caused comment had anyone been observing them with attention to spare from Cordelia's radiant performance. "Miss Arabella," he said quietly, drawing her away from the main celebration toward a secluded corner of the terrace, where climbing roses provided both privacy and propriety. "I find myself hoping that this change in our family connection will not alter the friendship I have come to value so highly in your company. Your conversation and counsel have become precious to me, and I would regret losing the benefit of your thoughtful perspective now that circumstances are settled." The words, spoken with obvious sincerity, sent both joy and anguish through Arabella's heart as she recognized in them the confirmation of Sebastian's regard alongside the impossibility of any future beyond friendship between them. "Your Grace honors me with such confidence," she replied carefully, maintaining the formal address that their new relationship would require, while her heart broke with each word. "I pray that your marriage will bring you every happiness you deserve, and I hope that Cordelia will prove worthy of the devotion you offer her. You have shown our family such extraordinary kindness that we are forever in your debt, and I will always treasure the privilege of your acquaintance." Their conversation continued with painful sweetness, as Sebastian spoke of his hopes for marriage and family, with the wistful uncertainty of a man who had committed himself without complete conviction, while Arabella offered the encouragement that duty required, even as each word cost her pieces of her soul. When he inquired about her own plans, now that Cordelia's future was secured, the question revealed his genuine concern for her welfare, alongside an intensity that suggested deeper feelings carefully concealed beneath proper concern. "I confess I have not given much thought to my own future," she admitted with honesty that surprised them both. "My role has always been to support Cordelia's interests, and now that she will have such an elevated position, I suppose I must discover what purpose remains for me in this new arrangement. Perhaps I shall become the maiden aunt who spoils your children with inappropriate books and unconventional ideas." The attempt at lightness failed to mask the underlying sadness in her voice, and Sebastian's expression grew troubled as he contemplated the implications of her words with attention that would have been remarkable in any bridegroom focused appropriately on his bride. Cordelia's transformation in the weeks following her engagement revealed the full extent of the deception she had practiced with such skill throughout Sebastian's courtship. As though the security of his irrevocable commitment had released her from any further need to maintain the facade of sweetness and compliance that had initially captured his attention. Her demands upon the household staff became increasingly unreasonable as she practiced for her future role as Duchess, issuing commands with imperious authority that left their servants bewildered by the change in her character from the gentle miss they had known since childhood. Most disturbing of all were her conversations with Sebastian about their future arrangements, discussions that revealed her complete focus on social advancement and material advantage with no apparent consideration for his feelings or the responsibilities that would accompany their elevated position. During one particularly uncomfortable afternoon, when Sebastian had called to discuss wedding plans, Arabella overheard Cordelia's detailed plans for their married life with horror that grew with each self-centered pronouncement. "I simply must have the London house redecorated entirely," she declared, with the authority of one whose preferences were not open to discussion. "The current furnishings are quite dreadfully old-fashioned, and I cannot possibly receive society in rooms that fail to reflect current taste. And we must spend at least 3 months of each year in London during the season, for I intend to establish myself as one of the leading hostesses of our generation. Your estates may require attention, but surely you can appoint competent stewards to manage such tedious details while we focus on our social obligations." Sebastian's responses to these pronouncements grew increasingly strained as the afternoon progressed, his attempts to discuss the genuine responsibilities of his position meeting with dismissive assurances from Cordelia that such matters were beneath the concern of people of their elevated station. When he mentioned his plans to visit his northern estates to assess improvements needed for his tenant farmers' welfare, Cordelia's reaction revealed depths of selfishness that left him visibly shaken by her casual disregard for those dependent upon their care. "Oh, Sebastian," she laughed with tinkling brightness that grated against his obvious seriousness, "surely you cannot mean to waste our time among those dreary people when we could be enjoying ourselves in proper society. Let your stewards deal with such mundane matters while we attend to the social duties appropriate to our rank. I have no intention of playing Lady Bountiful among dirty cottages when I could be hosting elegant entertainments for people who matter." Her dismissal of his genuine concern for his dependents struck Sebastian like a physical blow, and Arabella watched his expression transform from disappointment to something approaching revulsion as he began to understand the true nature of the woman he had committed himself to marry. The remainder of their visit passed in uncomfortable silence, broken only by Cordelia's chatter about wedding arrangements and social plans that revealed her complete disconnection from anything beyond her own immediate gratification, while Sebastian's responses grew monosyllabic and his glances toward Arabella became increasingly desperate, as though seeking reassurance that his growing doubts were not merely pre-wedding nerves, but legitimate concerns about the wisdom of his choice. The conversation that shattered Arabella's remaining illusions about maintaining family loyalty in the face of such deception occurred on a grey November afternoon when she approached her sister's chamber to discuss arrangements for their cousin's upcoming visit, only to discover Cordelia engaged in intimate conversation with her personal maid that revealed the full extent of her duplicity with devastating clarity. Hidden behind the partially open door, Arabella found herself an unwilling witness to revelations that destroyed any remaining hope that Cordelia might develop genuine feeling for Sebastian, given time and proper encouragement. "Honestly, Mary," Cordelia was saying to her maid with the careless authority of one confident in her servant's discretion, "I find his constant talk of duty and responsibility quite exhausting, but I suppose I must endure such tedious conversations until we are safely married and I can manage him more effectively. Men are such simple creatures when properly handled, and once I have provided him with an heir or two, I shall have considerable freedom to pursue my own interests while he occupies himself with his dreary estates and philosophical discussions. The Duke may fancy himself quite serious and principled, but I have observed enough married couples to understand that wives who know their business can shape their husbands' decisions without appearing to challenge their authority. And I have no doubt of my ability to guide Sebastian toward arrangements that suit my preferences rather than his current notions about rural responsibilities and social conscience. Her maid's responses, full of admiration for her mistress's cleverness and confidence in her ability to manipulate such an accomplished gentleman, revealed that Cordelia's deception had been planned with careful calculation from the beginning of their acquaintance. When Mary expressed concern that the Duke might prove more difficult to manage than anticipated given his obvious intelligence and strong principles, Cordelia's laugh held contempt that chilled Arabella's blood with its implications for Sebastian's future happiness. "Oh, he is quite besotted with my beauty and what he imagines to be my gentle nature," she replied with casual cruelty that revealed the depth of her deception. Men like Sebastian, who fancy themselves above such shallow considerations, are actually more susceptible to feminine beauty than those who openly acknowledge their preferences, because they convince themselves that their attraction must be based on deeper compatibility when it is really nothing more than lust dressed up in romantic sentiment. Once we are married, I shall have no difficulty maintaining his devotion through careful attention to my appearance, while pursuing my own agenda through methods he will never suspect. The conversation continued with additional details of Cordelia's plans for manipulating Sebastian's affections while establishing her position in society that left Arabella sick with horror at her sister's callous disregard for the genuine feelings of a man who deserved honesty and respect rather than calculated deception. As she retreated from her unwitting eavesdropping with knowledge that burned like acid in her consciousness, Arabella realized that her duty to family could no longer extend to protecting a deception that would destroy Sebastian's capacity for trust and happiness in marriage, regardless of the consequences to her own position or her family's financial security. The November wind rattled the windows of Thornfield Manor with increasing ferocity as the final month before Cordelia's wedding began its relentless countdown toward disaster, each day bringing Sebastian closer to a union that would destroy his capacity for happiness while binding him irrevocably to a woman whose true nature remained hidden beneath layers of calculated deception. The approaching winter seemed to mirror the growing darkness in Arabella's heart as she watched the preparations unfold around her with the helpless fascination of someone witnessing an approaching catastrophe they were powerless to prevent. Each detail of the elaborate celebration serving as another nail in the coffin of her own hopes. While Sebastian moved through the arrangements with the mechanical precision of a man fulfilling obligations rather than celebrating the fulfillment of his dreams. The family dinner that would prove the final breaking point of Sebastian's illusions was arranged by Lady Margaret with her usual strategic precision, designed to showcase Cordelia's accomplishments as mistress of domestic arrangements, while providing Sebastian with a preview of the harmonious family life that awaited him as her husband. The guest list had been carefully selected to include their most distinguished connections alongside certain individuals whose presence would serve specific purposes in the evening's carefully orchestrated performance. Though none of the participants except Arabella suspected the true drama that would unfold before the final course was served. Great-aunt Prudence Weatherby, their father's eldest sister, had been included despite her reputation for eccentric pronouncements and embarrassing observations that often left their hosts mortified by her complete disregard for social convention, her invitation serving Lady Margaret's purpose of demonstrating Cordelia's grace under pressure, while showing Sebastian how skillfully his bride could manage difficult family members. The elderly lady arrived in her customary state of magnificent disarray. her wig slightly askew and her gown adorned with an alarming collection of jewels that spoke more of past grandeur than present elegance, her sharp eyes already surveying the assembled company with the predatory interest of someone who delighted in exposing pretension and pompous behavior wherever it might be found. Sebastian, arriving promptly at the appointed hour with flowers for his hostess and appropriate courtesy for all assembled, looked distinguished in his evening clothes, despite the subtle signs of strain that Arabella's careful observation detected in the tight lines around his eyes and the mechanical nature of his smile as he accepted congratulations on his approaching nuptials. The early portion of the evening proceeded smoothly enough, with conversation flowing in the predictable channels of weather, politics, and social observation that characterized such gatherings. Though Arabella noticed Sebastian's increasing tendency to direct his remarks toward her rather than his intended bride, his eyes seeking hers with frequency that would have caused comment had anyone else possessed the leisure to observe such subtle interactions. Cordelia presided over the gathering with practiced grace, her golden beauty enhanced by candlelight that seemed drawn to her luminous complexion, and the sapphire silk gown that matched her engagement ring's brilliant stones, yet beneath her charming performance lay an edge of impatience with the tedious demands of family entertainment that occasionally showed through her perfect facade in moments of unguarded expression. The crisis began when Aunt Prudence, emboldened by Sir Edmund's excellent wine and the comfortable warmth of the dining room, launched into one of her characteristic observations about the younger generation's attitudes toward marriage and duty that struck uncomfortably close to truths that polite society preferred to leave unexamined. In my day, she declared with the authority of someone who had observed 8 decades of human folly, young people understood that marriage was a serious business requiring careful consideration of character rather than mere attraction to pretty faces and fine figures. Too many modern couples enter matrimony with romantic notions that dissolve quickly when faced with the realities of daily life and genuine partnership, leaving them bound to companions whose true natures prove quite different from their courtship performances. The pronouncement hung over the table like storm clouds gathering before a tempest, and Arabella watched with growing alarm as various guests struggled to formulate responses that might deflect Aunt Prudence's observations before they could develop into more pointed commentary about present company. Sebastian's expression grew thoughtful in ways that suggested dangerous reflection upon his own circumstances, while Cordelia's smile became increasingly strained as she recognized the potential threat that uncontrolled conversation might pose to her carefully maintained image. When the elderly lady continued with specific examples drawn from her extensive observation of unsuccessful matches within their social circle, Arabella saw her opportunity to intervene before irreparable damage could be done to the evening's harmony or Sebastian's peace of mind. "Aunt Prudence," she said with gentle warmth that acknowledged the validity of her observations while redirecting their focus, "your wisdom about marriage is surely drawn from the excellent example you observed in your parents' union, which we have all heard described as a model of mutual respect and affection. Perhaps you could share some of their insights about building lasting happiness in matrimony, for such guidance would benefit all of us who hope to follow their example." The skillful intervention transformed potential embarrassment into opportunity for edifying conversation, allowing Aunt Prudence to elaborate upon positive examples rather than dwelling upon failures, while providing the gathering with entertainment that reflected credit upon their family's values and tradition. Sebastian's eyes met Arabella's across the table with gratitude that held depths of appreciation far beyond mere social courtesy, his expression revealing recognition of both her diplomatic skill and her genuine concern for all present, while the warmth in his gaze sent treacherous flutter through her heart that she struggled to suppress. Cordelia's reaction to this display of sisterly loyalty and social grace proved far more troubling than Sebastian's appreciation, for rather than showing gratitude for Arabella's intervention on behalf of family harmony, she responded with an eye roll of such obvious disdain for their elderly relative that several guests noticed her disrespectful gesture. The contrast between Arabella's compassionate management of a difficult situation and Cordelia's casual cruelty toward a family member struck Sebastian with the force of revelation, his expression transforming as he began to understand the fundamental difference in character between the two sisters that his infatuation had previously blinded him to recognizing. When Aunt Prudence rambled into increasingly eccentric territory, describing her theories about the beneficial effects of cold baths and early rising upon matrimonial happiness, Arabella continued to listen with patient interest, while guiding conversation toward safer topics, her manner suggesting genuine affection for their difficult relative rather than mere dutiful tolerance. Cordelia, meanwhile, grew visibly bored by the elderly lady's monologue, her attention wandering to examination of her fingernails and surreptitious glances toward the clock that revealed her complete lack of compassion for someone whose only crime was age-related garrulousness combined with genuine concern for her family's welfare. The evening's denouement came when Aunt Prudence, perhaps sensing Cordelia's disdain despite its careful concealment, directed pointed observations about the importance of kindness and patience in successful marriages directly toward the bride-to-be, with the shrewd insight of someone who had observed human nature for many decades without being deceived by surface charm. The aftermath of dinner found Sebastian and Arabella alone in the library, through the kind of coincidence that fate sometimes arranges for its own inscrutable purposes. As the other guests dispersed according to their various inclinations, while Cordelia retreated to her chambers with complaints of fatigue that served to excuse her from further social obligations, Sebastian had sought the refuge of Sir Edmund's book collection with the obvious intention of escaping the strain of maintaining celebratory demeanor when his thoughts had taken such troubled directions, while Arabella's presence resulted from her intention to return a volume of poetry he had recommended during one of their earlier conversations, when such exchanges had seemed innocent rather than fraught with dangerous undercurrents that threatened to destroy them both. The book trembled slightly in her hands as she approached the chair where he sat, brooding over the fire, his dark head bent in contemplation that spoke of serious internal conflict rather than the satisfaction that should characterize a bridegroom in the final weeks before his wedding. "Mr. Wordsworth's verses," he said quietly, accepting the volume with fingers that brushed hers in a contact that sent electricity through both their systems, despite its apparent innocence. "Did you find in them the beauty I promised? Or do you think me overly influenced by romantic sentiment in my appreciation of his work?" The question carried weights of meaning far beyond literary criticism, and Arabella found herself struggling for words that might express her thoughts without revealing the dangerous territory their conversation was approaching with each exchange. "I found great beauty in his celebration of ordinary moments and common experiences," she replied carefully. "Though perhaps I am partial to poetry that finds profound meaning in simple observations rather than grand gestures and dramatic declarations. There is something appealing about the idea that happiness might be discovered in everyday companionship and shared understanding, rather than in the heightened emotions that novels and plays suggest should characterize true love." Sebastian's expression grew intense as he contemplated her words, his blue eyes searching her face with attention that made her pulse race despite her efforts to maintain appropriate composure in their dangerous proximity. "Do you truly believe that quiet companionship and intellectual compatibility might provide more lasting satisfaction than the passionate attachment that society considers essential to romantic love?" he asked with an urgency that revealed how deeply her observations had struck at the heart of his own growing doubts about his engagement. "I confess myself increasingly convinced that I have placed too much emphasis upon immediate attraction and too little upon the deeper compatibility that you describe, and I begin to fear that my choice has been guided more by infatuation than by sound judgment about the qualities that matter most in a life partner. The admission hung between them like a confession that neither dared acknowledge directly, yet both understood with perfect clarity the implications of his words for their present circumstances and impossible future. "Miss Arabella," he continued with voice that carried dangerous intensity, "I find myself compelled to speak truths that honor demands I keep silent. Yet my conscience will not allow me to proceed toward marriage without acknowledging what has become undeniable to anyone with eyes to see. These past months have revealed to me that genuine compatibility of mind and spirit creates bonds far stronger than mere physical attraction, and I have discovered in your company a peace and understanding that I fear I shall never find elsewhere." The confession that both had dreaded and longed for hung between them in the fire-lit stillness of the library, where leather-bound volumes seemed to lean closer, as though straining to witness the moment when two hearts acknowledged what honor forbade them to claim. Arabella felt her carefully maintained composure cracking under the weight of emotions too powerful to contain, her love for Sebastian warring with duty to family and sister in a battle that threatened to destroy her completely, regardless of its outcome. "Your Grace," she whispered, with voice that trembled despite her efforts at control, "you must not speak such words when your engagement to Cordelia makes any such feelings impossible to honor or pursue. Your wedding approaches, and she depends upon your commitment to provide her with the security and position that our family's circumstances require, while I could never forgive myself for interfering with arrangements that affect so many people beyond our own immediate happiness. You are an honorable man who would despise himself for betraying obligations undertaken in good faith, and I am a dutiful sister who cannot destroy her family's future for the sake of personal desires that should never have been acknowledged or encouraged." Sebastian rose from his chair with movements that spoke of barely controlled emotion, his tall frame seeming to fill the small space between them as he struggled with impulses that threatened to overwhelm the rigid control that duty and honor demanded he maintain. Yet he moved closer to where she stood beside the window, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence and see the conflict that raged in his expressive eyes between desire and obligation, love and duty, truth and social expectation. "Arabella," he said softly, dropping the formal address that propriety required in favor of the intimacy that reflected his true feelings. "Surely you know that what I feel for you transcends mere attraction or temporary infatuation. In your company I have discovered what marriage should truly be, a partnership of minds and hearts that makes each person better than they could be alone. And the thought of spending my life with someone who cannot provide such companionship fills me with despair that I struggle to conceal behind appropriate enthusiasm for my approaching wedding. Tell me honestly whether you believe I can build a happy marriage upon foundations so different from what my heart recognizes as true compatibility, and whether duty alone can sustain love where genuine affection and understanding are absent." The question hung between them like a bridge that neither dared cross, yet both longed to traverse despite the destruction that such honesty might bring to everyone whose welfare depended upon the success of his engagement to Cordelia. Arabella felt herself swaying toward him, as though drawn by magnetic force stronger than conscious will, her heart recognizing in his nearness the completion that her soul had sought without hope of finding. Yet even as her body betrayed her feelings by moving closer to his warmth, her mind rallied the arguments that duty demanded she remember. The space between them diminished to mere inches as Sebastian reached toward her face with trembling fingers that stopped just short of the caress they both desired, his expression holding question and plea that nearly destroyed her determination to preserve the honor that marriage to her sister required him to maintain. For one suspended moment that seemed to last forever and end too soon, they stood poised on the brink of an acknowledgement that would change everything between them irreversibly, their mutual love clear in expressions that neither could disguise, despite the impossibility of their situation. Then Arabella stepped backward with movement that took all her remaining strength, her voice breaking slightly as she spoke the words that duty demanded despite their cost to her breaking heart. "Sebastian," she whispered with finality that ended all hope, while preserving all honor, "we cannot pursue feelings that would destroy your engagement and ruin my sister's future, regardless of what our hearts might desire. Cordelia loves you and depends upon your commitment to provide her with happiness and security. While I could never forgive myself for betraying her trust or destroying the arrangements that our family requires for survival, you must fulfill your obligations as the honorable man I know you to be, and I must support my sister's happiness, even if it means sacrificing my own dreams of what love might be if circumstances were different." The discovery that would shatter the careful structure of deception that Cordelia had built around her engagement came through the kind of accident that destiny sometimes employs to reveal truths that human duplicity has worked to conceal. When Arabella's search for a misplaced handkerchief led her to examine the contents of her sister's writing desk more thoroughly than discretion would normally permit. Hidden beneath layers of social correspondence and household accounts, she discovered a collection of letters written in masculine hand that bore no resemblance to Sebastian's careful script, their passionate content and intimate tone revealing immediately that their author was someone far closer to Cordelia's heart than her intended husband had ever been. The name signed with flourishing confidence at the bottom of each missive belonged to Lord Nathaniel Fairfax, the charming second son whose lack of fortune had excluded him from consideration as a serious suitor, despite his obvious devotion to Cordelia throughout the social season. The correspondence revealed a love affair that had continued throughout Sebastian's courtship, with passionate declarations and future promises that painted Sebastian's role as nothing more than convenient provider of wealth and position that would allow Cordelia to maintain her relationship with Nathaniel after her marriage secured her financial independence. "My beloved Cordelia," read one letter that burned itself into Arabella's horrified consciousness, "surely you understand that my love for you transcends any temporary arrangements that circumstances may require, and I await the day when your marriage provides us with the security and freedom to pursue our true happiness without concern for material considerations. Your Duke may possess wealth and rank, but he can never claim the heart that belongs entirely to me. And I have complete confidence in your ability to manage both your husband and our relationship in ways that serve all our interests without requiring anyone to sacrifice genuine feeling for mere social convention." The casual assumption that Sebastian could be deceived and manipulated indefinitely, while Cordelia pursued her real emotional attachments elsewhere, revealed depths of callousness that left Arabella sick with horror at the scale of deception being practiced upon a man whose only crime was falling victim to her sister's calculated charm. Additional letters outlined specific plans for continuing their relationship after Cordelia's marriage, with arrangements for secret meetings and methods of communication that displayed planning worthy of experienced conspirators rather than romantic lovers driven by irresistible passion. When Arabella confronted her sister with evidence of the affair, demanding explanation and immediate honesty about her intentions toward Sebastian, Cordelia's response revealed that her deception had been even more comprehensive and deliberate than the worst scenarios Arabella had imagined. "Oh, Bella," she laughed with casual cruelty that demonstrated her complete lack of conscience about the pain her actions would cause. "Surely you cannot be so naive as to believe that marriages among our class have anything to do with romantic attachment. Sebastian provides me with wealth, position, and social consequence that Nathaniel could never offer, while Nathaniel provides me with the emotional satisfaction and genuine affection that Sebastian's serious nature could never supply. I see no reason why I cannot enjoy both advantages simultaneously, and I have every confidence in my ability to manage such arrangements without anyone suffering unnecessary distress. Married women of intelligence have been pursuing such solutions for centuries, and I suspect I shall prove quite skilled at maintaining both relationships in ways that serve everyone's interests. Her sister's casual assumption that she could deceive Sebastian indefinitely while using his honorable nature and genuine affections for her own convenience filled Arabella with rage that transcended personal considerations to embrace outrage on behalf of justice and truth themselves. The evening that would shatter all illusions and expose the carefully constructed deception at the heart of Cordelia's engagement arrived with the cruel irony that fate sometimes employs when revealing truths that human duplicity has worked so diligently to conceal. The pre-wedding celebration at Almack's had been planned as a glittering triumph of social success, designed to showcase the bride-to-be in all her radiant glory, while providing society with one final opportunity to admire the perfect match between beauty and rank that had captured everyone's imagination throughout the season. Lady Margaret had orchestrated every detail with her customary precision. From Cordelia's gown of celestial blue silk that complemented her sapphire eyes to the guest list that included every person of consequence whose approval mattered for the family's continued standing in fashionable circles. Sebastian arrived at the appointed hour with the punctuality that characterized all his social obligations, his evening attire impeccable despite the subtle signs of strain that recent weeks had etched around his eyes and mouth, his manner suggesting a man fulfilling duties rather than celebrating the approaching culmination of his romantic dreams. The assembly rooms glittered with candlelight reflected in countless mirrors and crystal chandeliers, while the cream of London society gathered in their finest apparel to witness what many considered the season's most brilliant social triumph, though none of the assembled guests suspected that they were about to witness instead one of its most spectacular disasters. Cordelia held court near the orchestra platform in a gown that seemed designed to capture and reflect every available beam of light, her golden hair arranged in an elaborate coiffure that showcased the Ashworth diamonds Sebastian had presented as an engagement gift, her manner radiating confidence and satisfaction as she received the admiring attention of guests who recognized her elevated position as future Duchess. The early portion of the evening proceeded according to Lady Margaret's careful planning, with appropriate toasts offered to the happy couple and general expressions of approval for a match that satisfied society's expectations about the proper union of beauty and wealth, rank and accomplishment. Though close observers might have noticed Sebastian's tendency to remain at the periphery of celebrations, rather than basking in the attention that should have gratified any prospective bridegroom. When Sebastian stepped away from the main gathering to seek a moment's respite from the oppressive weight of congratulations and social performance, his intention was merely to find solitude in which to compose himself for the remainder of an evening that tested his endurance beyond comfortable limits. Yet fate had arranged that his quest for privacy would instead lead him to discoveries that would transform his understanding of everything he had believed about his engagement and his intended bride. The antechamber where Sebastian sought refuge from the overwhelming festivities was supposed to be unoccupied, designated for ladies' private conversations and moments of rest from dancing. Yet as he approached its entrance, voices from within made him pause with the instinctive courtesy of someone who would not intrude upon others' private discourse. The sound of Cordelia's musical laughter drifted through the partially open door, accompanied by masculine tones that belonged unmistakably to Lord Nathaniel Fairfax, and something in their intimate cadence sent warning signals through Sebastian's consciousness that made him hesitate rather than announce his presence or withdraw with appropriate discretion. The conversation that Sebastian overheard while frozen in horrified fascination outside the antechamber door revealed the complete scope of Cordelia's deception with devastating clarity, each word striking his consciousness like physical blows that shattered forever his illusions about the woman he had committed himself to marry. "My darling Nathaniel," Cordelia was saying with breathless intimacy that no proper lady should employ toward any gentleman save her intended husband, "surely you must understand that these tedious weeks of performance will soon be over, and we shall be free to pursue our real happiness without concern for appearances or social expectations. Sebastian provides me with the wealth and position that circumstances require, but you possess my heart entirely, and once the wedding ceremony secures my legal status as Duchess, I shall have both the resources and the freedom to arrange our future according to our own desires rather than society's tedious requirements." The casual dismissal of Sebastian's role as nothing more than convenient provider of material advantages struck him with stunning force. Yet worse revelations followed as Cordelia outlined with calculating precision her plans for managing both relationships simultaneously while using Sebastian's honorable nature and genuine affections as tools for securing her own comfort and independence. I have observed his character sufficiently to understand exactly how to maintain his devotion while pursuing my real interests," she continued, with confidence that revealed months of careful study and manipulation. "He fancies himself above mere physical attraction, which makes him quite susceptible to feminine tears and appeals to his protective instincts. And I have every confidence that a wife who appears devoted while maintaining appropriate mystery will command his continued respect and affection regardless of how she chooses to arrange her private entertainments." Sebastian's growing fondness for serious conversation and intellectual discourse provides additional advantages, since I need only listen with apparent interest while he expounds upon his various philosophical concerns, leaving me free to pursue more amusing companionship when his attention turns toward estate management and other tedious, masculine occupation. The cynical assessment of his character and the casual assumption that she could manipulate his feelings indefinitely filled Sebastian with horror that transcended personal betrayal to encompass outrage at the fundamental dishonesty and cruelty that Cordelia's words revealed about her essential nature. When Nathaniel's responses indicated not shock at such comprehensive deception, but admiration for her cleverness in securing both material security and emotional satisfaction through carefully managed duplicity, Sebastian understood that he was witnessing not temporary weakness or moment of doubt, but fundamental corruption of character that made genuine marriage impossible between them. The physical intimacy that accompanied their conversation, evident in rustling silk and whispered endearments that no engaged woman should share with anyone save her intended husband, provided final confirmation of betrayals that extended far beyond mere emotional infidelity to encompass active deception about her virtue and worthiness as a wife. The confrontation that followed Sebastian's entrance into the antechamber created a tableau of shock and exposure that burned itself permanently into the consciousness of all three participants, as Cordelia's confident manipulation transformed instantly into desperate damage control, while Nathaniel's romantic ardor dissolved into cowardly concern for his own reputation and social standing. Sebastian's appearance in the doorway, his face transformed by fury and betrayal into something that barely resembled the courteous gentleman who had faithfully attended Cordelia throughout their engagement, struck both conspirators with the terrifying realization that their careful deception had been completely exposed at the worst possible moment. Cordelia's initial response demonstrated the calculating nature that had characterized their entire relationship, as she immediately attempted to minimize the severity of what Sebastian had witnessed through explanations that insulted his intelligence while revealing her continued assumption that she could manipulate his reactions through feminine wiles and appeals to his protective instincts. "Sebastian," she gasped with theatrical dismay that might have convinced someone who had not heard her previous words. "You must not misunderstand what you have seen here tonight. Lord Fairfax was simply offering comfort during a moment of pre-wedding anxiety, and I fear my gratitude for his kindness may have appeared more intimate than propriety allows, though I assure you that my heart belongs entirely to you and our approaching happiness." The explanation, delivered with wide-eyed innocence that failed completely to acknowledge the passionate conversation Sebastian had overheard, revealed Cordelia's continued confidence in her ability to control his perceptions through practiced deception. Yet the fury in his expression warned her that such tactics would prove insufficient to repair the damage that truth had inflicted upon their relationship. When Sebastian's silence stretched beyond the point where polite reassurance might be expected, Cordelia's manner shifted toward more desperate measures that revealed the calculating desperation beneath her beautiful facade. "You must understand," she continued, with voice that carried undertones of threat beneath its pleading surface, "that whatever you may think you heard or saw tonight cannot justify destroying the arrangements that so many people depend upon for their happiness and security. Our families have invested considerable resources and reputation in this alliance, and society expects our marriage to proceed according to plan, regardless of any temporary misunderstandings that private moments might create. Surely a gentleman of your honor and consideration would not allow momentary jealousy to destroy so many people's welfare for the sake of pride or wounded feelings that time and understanding could heal completely." Sebastian's response, when it finally came, carried the deadly calm of someone whose fundamental assumptions about reality had been shattered beyond any possibility of repair, his voice holding none of the warmth or consideration that had characterized all his previous interactions with the woman he had planned to marry. "Miss Thornfield," he said with formality that restored the distance she had spent months attempting to bridge, "I fear there can be no misunderstanding about what I have witnessed tonight, nor any possibility of continuing with wedding plans that were based upon complete deception about your character and feelings. The engagement between us is ended as of this moment, and I trust you will find in Lord Fairfax the happiness you have been seeking in his company while maintaining false promises to me." The public dissolution of the engagement that followed Sebastian's departure from the antechamber created shockwaves that reverberated through London society with devastating force, as guests at the celebration witnessed the unprecedented spectacle of a duke publicly renouncing his intended bride without explanation or opportunity for reconciliation. Sebastian's announcement, delivered with aristocratic composure that concealed the depth of his personal anguish, shocked the assembly into stunned silence before exploding into speculation and gossip that would dominate fashionable conversation for months to come. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared with authority that commanded immediate attention from every person present, "I must inform you that the engagement between Miss Cordelia Thornfield and myself has been terminated by mutual consent, effective immediately. I ask for your understanding and discretion regarding this personal matter, and I trust that all present will respect the privacy that such circumstances require." The formal announcement, delivered without elaboration or accusation that might have provided society with specific targets for their curiosity and judgment, left guests struggling to comprehend what could have caused such dramatic reversal of arrangements that had appeared settled beyond any possibility of change. Cordelia's response to this public humiliation revealed the full extent of her vindictive nature as she abandoned all pretense of feminine delicacy in favor of attacks designed to salvage her reputation at Sebastian's expense, her beautiful features transformed by rage into something that shocked observers with its naked malice and calculation chance. If His Grace chooses to break faith with promises made in good faith before witnesses, she declared with voice that carried clearly across the stunned assembly, then perhaps society should inquire more closely into the reasons that might drive a gentleman to such dishonorable behavior toward a lady who has given him no cause for complaint beyond failing to satisfy expectations that no reasonable woman could be expected to fulfill. The accusation, designed to shift blame for the broken engagement onto Sebastian's character while portraying herself as innocent victim of masculine caprice, backfired spectacularly as guests who had witnessed her intimate conversation with Nathaniel began to understand the true reasons behind Sebastian's dramatic action. The scandal that erupted from the evening's revelations spread through London society with the speed of wildfire consuming dry timber, carrying with it speculation and rumors that threatened to destroy not only Cordelia's reputation, but her entire family's position in fashionable circles, as whispered conversations in drawing rooms and clubs dissected every aspect of the failed engagement, while society struggled to understand what had caused such spectacular collapse of what appeared to be a perfect match. Some blamed Sebastian for failing to honor commitments made in good faith. Others suggested financial difficulties or character flaws that had made marriage impossible, while still others whispered about Cordelia's behavior and the mysterious circumstances that had led to such public disgrace. Yet none possessed sufficient facts to satisfy their curiosity or provide definitive explanations for the social catastrophe they had witnessed. The aftermath of the broken engagement plunged the Thornfield household into crisis that threatened their complete social and financial ruin, as the scandal of Cordelia's public humiliation combined with mounting debts and lost opportunities to create circumstances that required immediate action if the family hoped to salvage any remnant of their former position. Arabella found herself caught between loyalty to her sister and recognition that Cordelia's behavior had been fundamentally wrong, while also grappling with her own complex feelings about Sebastian's freedom and the impossible situation that his broken engagement created for all parties involved. The weight of family expectations and social pressure combined with her own moral compass to create an internal conflict that threatened to tear her apart as she struggled to find solutions that might preserve some measure of honor and security for everyone whose welfare had been damaged by Cordelia's deception and its explosive revelation. Society's demand for explanations and the persistent speculation about the true reasons for the broken engagement created additional pressure as rumors multiplied beyond any possibility of control, some suggesting Sebastian's financial difficulties or character defects, others implying improprieties in Cordelia's behavior that threatened her reputation and marriageability beyond any hope of recovery. Lady Margaret's desperate attempts to control the damage through strategic social maneuvering and careful management of information proved inadequate against the tide of gossip and speculation that threatened to overwhelm their family's remaining connections and resources, while Sir Edmund's increasing despair about their financial situation added urgency to the crisis that demanded immediate resolution. In this atmosphere of desperation and social chaos, Arabella found herself contemplating solutions that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances, including the possibility of offering herself as replacement bride in arrangements that might salvage both families' positions while providing Sebastian with face-saving alternatives to complete social disgrace. The idea of such sacrifice appealed to her sense of duty and justice, while offering the only apparent solution to circumstances that threatened everyone's welfare. Yet she could not bring herself to make such an offer when it would forever taint any relationship between them with obligation rather than choice, transforming what might have been love into mere social convenience and destroying any possibility of genuine happiness for either party. Instead, she chose the path of complete honesty and selfless resignation, writing Sebastian a letter that explained her sister's deception while absolving him of any obligation to their family's welfare and expressing her own feelings in words she never intended him to recognize as coming from her heart rather than her sense of duty. "Your Grace," she wrote with tears falling upon paper that would carry her final goodbye to the man she loved. "I write to offer explanation and apology for the deception you discovered tonight, while assuring you that no member of our family expects or desires any consideration from you beyond the justice you have already shown in ending an engagement based upon fundamental dishonesty about my sister's character and feelings. Cordelia's behavior toward you has been unconscionable, and while family loyalty prevents me from condemning her publicly, I cannot allow your generous nature to be further imposed upon through appeals to duty or sympathy that circumstances do not warrant. You deserve a partner who values your character above your position and who can offer genuine affection rather than calculated performance, and I pray that you will find such happiness in future despite the pain that present circumstances have caused your trusting and honorable heart." The letter that would transform Sebastian's understanding of everything that had transpired between himself and the Thornfield family arrived at Ashworth House on a grey December morning when London lay shrouded in fog that seemed to mirror the confusion and despair that had enveloped his thoughts since the catastrophic evening at Almack's. Arabella's careful script, so different from Cordelia's elaborate flourishes, covered several pages with words that carried the weight of truth and sacrifice in every measured sentence, her elegant hand revealing nothing of the tears that had fallen upon the paper as she composed what she believed would be her final communication with the man whose happiness had become more precious to her than her own welfare or her family's security. Sebastian read her explanation of Cordelia's deception with growing amazement at the depths of manipulation he had escaped. Yet it was not the revelation of his former fiancée's calculated betrayal that struck him with transformative force, but rather the profound generosity and wisdom that characterized Arabella's response to circumstances that would have justified bitter recrimination or desperate appeals for his continued consideration. Where another woman might have used knowledge of Cordelia's affair to secure advantage for herself or her family, Arabella had chosen instead to absolve him completely of any obligation while expressing hope for his future happiness with someone worthier of his affections, her words revealing a nobility of character that made him understand with stunning clarity why every moment of genuine connection and authentic feeling in the past months had occurred in her presence rather than with the woman he had planned to marry. The letter's conclusion, with its carefully restrained expression of personal feeling disguised as general well-wishes for his welfare, pierced his heart with recognition of love offered without expectation of return, sacrifice made without hope of acknowledgement, and devotion that had placed his happiness above all personal considerations throughout their acquaintance. "Your Grace," she had written with formality that could not disguise the emotion beneath, "I pray that you will find in future the genuine affection and understanding that circumstances have denied you in present arrangements, and I hope that memories of our family's connection will not cause you lasting pain, despite the deception that characterized its foundation. Please know that your kindness and consideration toward all of us, despite our unworthiness of such generosity, will remain a treasured memory that brightens whatever future awaits those whose circumstances have changed so dramatically from the happy prospects we once imagined might be ours to enjoy." The words, read and reread until Sebastian could recite them from memory, revealed everything he needed to understand about the true nature of love and the woman who possessed it in such extraordinary measure, while simultaneously making him realize that his feelings for her had grown from authentic compatibility and shared values, rather than mere physical attraction or social convenience. The revelation that crystallized as Sebastian contemplated Arabella's letter with growing wonder and self-knowledge transformed his understanding not only of recent events, but of his own heart, and the true foundation of lasting affection between compatible souls. Every conversation that had touched his mind and stirred his interest, every moment when he had felt truly understood and appreciated for his authentic self rather than his title and position. Every glimpse of the profound connection that made solitude bearable and companionship meaningful had occurred in Arabella's presence, while his interactions with Cordelia had been characterized by performance and surface attractions that dissolved under serious examination. The intellectual discussions about literature and philosophy that had provided some of his most satisfying hours, the gentle correction of his assumptions about social issues that had broadened his understanding of the world beyond his privileged position, the quiet moments of shared observation and mutual appreciation for beauty, both natural and artistic, all had involved Arabella's thoughtful participation and genuine engagement with ideas that interested him beyond their mere social utility were. When he recalled the family dinner, where Cordelia's cruelty toward their elderly relative had been smoothly redirected by Arabella's compassionate intervention, Sebastian understood that he had been observing not merely good manners, but fundamental differences in character that made one sister capable of genuine love, while the other remained trapped in calculations of advantage and appearance. The contrast between Cordelia's dismissive treatment of servants and social inferiors, and Arabella's natural courtesy toward all people, regardless of their station, revealed distinctions that went beyond mere breeding to encompass essential humanity and moral development that no amount of beauty or social accomplishment could replace. Most significantly, he began to recognize that his growing preference for Arabella's company and conversation had been love developing naturally from true compatibility and mutual respect, while his attachment to Cordelia had been infatuation based upon surface qualities that meant nothing when deeper understanding was required for genuine partnership. The recognition that he had been pursuing marriage with the wrong sister while falling in love with the right one filled Sebastian with determination to correct his mistake before circumstances could separate him permanently from the woman whose worth he had finally learned to recognize and value at its true measure. Yet when he arrived at the Thornfield London residence, prepared to declare his feelings and seek permission to court Arabella properly, he discovered that the family had already departed for their country estate in Hampshire, retreating from the scandal and social disgrace that Cordelia's exposed deception had brought upon their household, with consequences that extended far beyond the broken engagement to threaten their entire position in fashionable society. The journey to Hampshire that Sebastian undertook, with single-minded determination to reach Arabella before circumstances could make such pursuit impossible, carried him through winter countryside that seemed to mirror his own internal landscape of hope, struggling against uncertainty and fear that his delayed recognition of truth might have come too late to secure the happiness that genuine love could provide. The modest Thornfield estate, approached through lanes made treacherous by December mud and bordered by fields lying fallow under grey skies, presented a stark contrast to the London elegance where Sebastian had first encountered the family during their season of social ambition, yet the sight of smoke rising from chimneys and lights glowing warmly in windows suggested that retreat from fashionable society had not diminished the essential humanity that made this household precious beyond any consideration of rank or fortune. His arrival at their door, unannounced and unexpected, created consternation among servants who recognized his elevated position, while struggling to understand what could have brought such a distinguished gentleman to their reduced circumstances. Yet their courtesy, despite obvious bewilderment, spoke well of the family's continued ability to inspire loyalty and respect, regardless of their changed fortunes. The butler who admitted Sebastian to the modest drawing-room, where the family gathered during evening hours, moved with dignity that transcended material considerations, while the housekeeper's efficient management of his unexpected arrival demonstrated that good service continued despite whatever financial constraints might have altered other aspects of the household's operations. When Sebastian was announced to the assembled family, their various reactions revealed the different ways that recent disasters had affected each member's character and expectations. From Sir Edmund's obvious anxiety about what this visit might portend for their already precarious situation to Lady Margaret's barely concealed hope that Sebastian's presence indicated possible reconciliation or renewed consideration that might restore their social position. Cordelia's response combined defiant anger with calculating assessment of whether his arrival suggested opportunity for manipulation or revenge that might serve her current interests, while Arabella's expression showed only calm resignation, mixed with concern for whatever additional complications his presence might create for family members who had already suffered enough disruption and disappointment because of circumstances beyond their control. The household that Sebastian observed during his visit revealed both the devastating effects of social disgrace and financial constraint, alongside the strength of character that enabled survival and adaptation when circumstances demanded fundamental changes in expectations and lifestyle. Sir Edmund, aged visibly by worry about debts that could no longer be concealed through social maneuvering and the loss of connections that had provided both income and status, struggled with the reality of reduced prospects while maintaining dignity that spoke well of his essential character, despite poor judgment in financial matters that had contributed to their current difficulties. Lady Margaret, bitter about the collapse of plans that had promised elevation and security for her daughters, alternated between rage at Sebastian's role in destroying their hopes and desperate calculation about whether his unexpected visit might indicate renewed possibilities for salvaging something from the wreckage of their social ambitions. Most troubling was Cordelia's response to their changed circumstances, as she refused to accept responsibility for the deception and betrayal that had caused their disgrace, while continuing to plot methods of either winning back Sebastian's affections or securing Lord Nathaniel's commitment to marriage, despite his obvious reluctance to associate himself with scandal that threatened his own social position. Her complete inability to recognize the justice of Sebastian's reaction or feel genuine remorse for the pain her duplicity had caused revealed character flaws that made her continued presence a source of tension and embarrassment for family members who struggled to maintain basic harmony while adjusting to dramatically altered expectations. In striking contrast to this atmosphere of recrimination and despair, Arabella had assumed responsibility for managing their reduced household with efficiency and grace that transformed potential humiliation into dignified adjustment to new realities. Her natural authority and genuine concern for everyone's welfare providing the stability that enabled her parents to begin accepting changes they had initially found overwhelming and incomprehensible there. Sebastian observed her interactions with servants who clearly respected her judgment and kindness, her patient management of Cordelia's emotional outbursts and accusations, and her gentle encouragement of her parents' efforts to find peace in circumstances that differed so dramatically from their former expectations, recognizing in her behavior the strength and compassion that made her worthy of love that transcended considerations of social position or material advantage. When he requested private audience with her, expecting that she would assume his visit related to practical matters concerning the broken engagement or family obligations that required resolution, Sebastian found himself facing the woman whose true worth he had finally learned to recognize, while struggling to find words that might express feelings so profound and important that their successful communication would determine whether his future held happiness beyond anything he had previously imagined, or regret that would shadow every remaining day of his existence. The conversation that followed Sebastian's request for privacy took place in the small library that served as Sir Edmund's refuge from domestic concerns and Arabella's sanctuary for the reading that provided intellectual sustenance during their exile from London society. Its modest collection of books and comfortable furnishings, creating atmosphere of intimacy that encouraged honest communication while providing appropriate setting for declarations that would affect both their futures irrevocably. Arabella entered the room with composure that concealed the wild beating of her heart as she struggled to understand what Sebastian's unexpected arrival might mean for circumstances that had seemed settled beyond any possibility of change, her manner suggesting polite attention to whatever practical matters he wished to discuss, while her eyes betrayed the hope and fear that his presence awakened in her carefully guarded heart. "Miss Arabella," Sebastian began with formality that gradually dissolved as emotion overcame social convention, "your letter reached me at the moment when I most needed to understand the truth about everything that has transpired between our families, and I find myself compelled to speak honestly about discoveries that have transformed my understanding of my own feelings and the nature of genuine attachment between compatible souls. I have come to realize that my engagement to your sister was based upon superficial attractions and social expectations that blinded me to the profound compatibility and authentic affection that had been growing between us throughout our acquaintance, and I can no longer remain silent about feelings that honor demands I acknowledge, despite the complicated circumstances that recent events have created for us all." The declaration, delivered with intensity that left no doubt about his sincerity, struck Arabella with emotions too powerful and conflicting to process immediately, as joy at hearing her feelings reciprocated warred with concern about the impropriety of such attachment so soon after his broken engagement and the practical impossibilities that their different circumstances seemed to present for any future relationship. "Your Grace?" she replied with voice that trembled despite her efforts at control. "Surely you cannot mean to suggest that feelings developed during your courtship of my sister could provide foundation for the honorable attachment between us when society would view such rapid transfer of affection as evidence of fickleness rather than genuine regard, and when my family's current circumstances make any social connection between us impossible without damage to your reputation and position, that I could never forgive myself for causing through selfish acceptance of what honor forbids me to encourage." Sebastian's response to Arabella's concerns about propriety and social perception revealed the depth of understanding he had gained about the nature of true love and the foundation upon which lasting happiness must be built between partners who share more than surface attraction or social convenience. "Miss Arabella," he said with voice that carried conviction born of profound self-knowledge, "I must correct your assumption that my feelings represent any transfer of affection from one sister to another, for the truth is far different and infinitely more significant for our future happiness than such superficial explanation could encompass. What I felt for Cordelia was infatuation based upon physical beauty and social expectations that blinded me to the absence of genuine compatibility between us, while what I feel for you has grown from authentic connection and shared values that create the foundation upon which real love must be built. During all those months of courtship when I believed myself devoted to your sister, my heart was actually learning to recognize its true home in your company, though I was too inexperienced in matters of genuine affection to understand what was happening until circumstances forced me to examine the difference between superficial attraction and profound attachment. Every conversation that touched my mind and stirred my soul, every moment when I felt truly understood and appreciated for my authentic self rather than my position and wealth, every glimpse of the deep compatibility that makes two people perfect partners in life's journey occurred with you, not with the woman I planned to marry. The recognition of this truth has nothing to do with consolation or substitution, but represents instead the awakening of understanding about what love truly means and where my heart has belonged from almost the beginning of our acquaintance." He moved closer to where she stood beside the window, his tall figure seeming to fill the small space between them as he struggled to find words adequate to express feelings that transcended ordinary declaration and demanded acknowledgement of the profound connection that had been growing between them throughout months of careful concealment and social obligation. "Arabella," he continued, dropping formality in favor of the intimacy that their mutual love deserved, "I am not offering you my hand because Cordelia proved unworthy, or because duty requires me to salvage something from the wreckage of broken engagement, but because you are the woman I love with my entire heart and soul, the partner I need for genuine happiness, and the person whose welfare has become more precious to me than my own comfort or social standing. When I think of my future, every vision of contentment and fulfillment includes your presence as essential element, not as replacement for someone else, but as the completion of myself that I never knew was missing until I understood what real compatibility could mean between two people who share the same values and find joy in each other's authentic company." The passion in his voice and the intensity of his gaze left Arabella trembling with emotions she had never dared acknowledge fully. Yet even as her heart soared with joy at hearing her deepest feelings reciprocated, her practical nature demanded that she address the social complexities that their unusual circumstances would create for both their reputations and their families' welfare. The concerns that Arabella voiced about society's perception and the potential damage to Sebastian's position revealed both her genuine care for his welfare and her own insecurities about whether she could ever be seen as more than a poor substitute for her more conventionally beautiful sister. "Your Grace," she said with voice that carried pain alongside careful control, "surely you must recognize that society will view any attachment between us as evidence that you are settling for what remains available rather than choosing what you truly desire, and such perception would be both humiliating for me and damaging to your reputation as a man of discernment and genuine feeling. How can I accept what appears to be consolation when everyone will assume that you turned to the plain sister only after the beautiful one proved unworthy of your regard? I could not bear to spend our entire married life wondering whether you truly chose me or simply made the best of disappointing circumstances, nor could I endure the whispers and speculation about whether your affections might transfer again if a more appealing option should present itself." Sebastian's response to these fears demonstrated both his understanding of her vulnerable position and his determination to prove that his love was based upon recognition of her unique worth rather than mere acceptance of available alternatives. "My dearest Arabella," he said with voice that held both tenderness and conviction, "I understand your concerns about society's judgment, but I hope you will allow me to address each of your fears with specific evidence about why my choice represents genuine preference rather than reluctant acceptance of circumstances. When I fell in love with you, it was not because Cordelia disappointed me, but because your intelligence challenged and delighted me in ways that mere beauty never could, because your compassion for others revealed character that made me want to become a better man, because your ability to find profound meaning in ordinary moments showed me depths of perception that transformed my understanding of what partnership could mean between two compatible souls. I love the way your mind works through complex problems with logical precision, while never losing sight of human considerations that pure rationality might overlook. I treasure your gift for languages that allows you to communicate with our French guests and Irish tenants with equal facility and respect, and I admire your quiet strength that enables you to manage difficult situations without losing your essential gentleness or compromising your principles for the sake of convenience. He paused to take her hands in his touch sending electricity through both their systems as physical contact confirmed the emotional connection that words had been struggling to express adequately. Most importantly, he continued with intensity that left no doubt about his sincerity. "I love you for qualities that are uniquely yours and could never be found in anyone else, regardless of their conventional beauty or social advantages. Your sister's betrayal was not a disappointment that drove me to seek consolation elsewhere, but rather a revelation that freed me from mistaken attachment and allowed me to recognize where my heart truly belonged. I am not settling for you, my darling. I am choosing you as my first and only real choice, the woman who completes me in ways I never knew were possible until I understood the difference between infatuation and genuine love." The proposal that followed Sebastian's passionate declaration represented not merely a request for marriage, but a commitment to partnership based upon mutual respect, shared values, and authentic affection that had grown from careful observation and genuine compatibility rather than surface attraction or social convenience. "Arabella," Sebastian said, as he dropped to one knee beside the window, where winter sunlight created a natural spotlight for the most important moment of both their lives. "Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Not as consolation for disappointment or duty to social expectation, but as the woman I love above all others and cannot imagine living without. I offer you my heart, my name, my complete devotion, and my promise that every day of our marriage will prove how grateful I am that circumstances prevented me from making the terrible mistake of marrying someone else when my true happiness lay within reach, if only I had possessed the wisdom to recognize it sooner. I know that our engagement will face social scrutiny and whispered speculation about my motives and your worthiness. But I have complete confidence that our obvious happiness and genuine compatibility will silence such doubts while proving that real love creates stronger foundation for marriage than mere beauty or calculated social advantage ever could provide." Her acceptance, when it came through tears of joy that she no longer attempted to conceal, carried the weight of mutual understanding and shared commitment to building their future upon the solid foundation of authentic affection rather than the shifting sands of social expectation or material calculation. "Sebastian," she whispered as he placed his grandmother's ring upon her finger with ceremony that satisfied both their hearts and their sense of propriety, "I accept your proposal with complete happiness and the promise to prove myself worthy of the love you offer, though I confess myself amazed that circumstances which seemed designed to destroy all hope of happiness have instead brought us to understanding that might never have been possible under different conditions. Perhaps Cordelia's deception was indeed a gift that freed us both to recognize what real love means and pursue the kind of partnership that creates lasting joy rather than mere social success." The kiss that sealed their engagement carried promise of passion tempered by respect, desire enhanced by genuine compatibility, and love that would grow stronger through shared experience rather than fading when initial infatuation gave way to the realities of daily life and authentic partnership between two people who understood and valued each other's true character. The engagement that followed Sebastian's proposal faced initial skepticism from London society, as news of his rapid attachment to Arabella spread through drawing rooms and clubs with varying degrees of surprise, speculation, and barely concealed criticism about the unusual circumstances that had led to such unexpected arrangements. Many viewed Arabella as Sebastian's consolation prize, assuming that wounded pride and social pressure had driven him to accept what remained available rather than pursuing genuine preference for the quieter sister whose intelligence and character had gone largely unnoticed during Cordelia's brilliant season. The whispers and knowing glances that followed their appearances at social gatherings tested both their resolve and their confidence in decisions that defied conventional expectations about proper timing and suitable matches, yet their obvious happiness and natural compatibility gradually began to silence the most persistent critics, while winning unexpected allies among those who recognized authentic affection when they witnessed its daily demonstration. Lady Catherine Blackwood proved instrumental in establishing social acceptance for the unusual engagement, her genuine affection for Arabella combining with protective concern for her brother's welfare to create powerful advocacy for their union among influential members of society whose approval mattered for continued social harmony. She hosted intimate gatherings that showcased the new couple's harmony while providing opportunities for skeptical observers to witness firsthand the intellectual compatibility and mutual devotion that characterized their relationship, her careful management of social opinion demonstrating that Sebastian's choice represented wisdom rather than weakness or desperate acceptance of disappointing circumstances. When Lady Jersey herself pronounced the engagement a brilliant example of genuine attachment triumphing over superficial considerations, society's acceptance became inevitable as those who had initially criticized Sebastian's rapid change of affection began instead to praise his discrimination in recognizing true worth beneath unassuming exterior appearances. The months leading to their wedding passed in growing happiness as both families adjusted to arrangements that provided everyone with better outcomes than the original engagement could have achieved, even Sir Edmund and Lady Margaret recognizing that Sebastian's sincere devotion to Arabella promised more lasting security than Cordelia's calculated manipulation could ever have provided for their family's welfare. The ceremony itself, held in the beautiful chapel at Ashworth Park, rather than the grand London spectacle originally planned for Cordelia's wedding, emphasized the genuine partnership and shared values that formed the foundation of their union, while gathering only those people whose presence represented authentic friendship and family affection rather than mere social obligation or curiosity about unusual circumstance. The epilogue to their love story, written in happiness that deepened with each passing month of married life, proved that genuine compatibility and mutual respect create foundations for lasting contentment that transcend temporary social criticism or conventional expectations about proper matches and suitable timing. 1 year after their wedding, Sebastian and Arabella had established themselves as partners whose shared management of his estates and thoughtful attention to their tenants' welfare demonstrated the practical benefits of marriage based upon intellectual equality and moral compatibility, rather than mere attraction or social advantage. Arabella had found her voice as Duchess, using her intelligence and natural authority to implement improvements in estate schools and tenant housing, while maintaining the dignity and grace that befitted her elevated position without losing the essential humanity that made her beloved by all who knew her personally rather than through social reputation alone. Their happiness was evident to everyone who observed them together, from the servants who noted their mutual consideration and genuine affection, to the society hostesses who found their conversations more engaging and their company more pleasant than many couples whose unions had been celebrated as brilliant matches when they occurred. The contrast between their successful marriage and Cordelia's disappointing union with Lord Nathaniel Fairfax, whose passion had proved insufficient to sustain them through reduced circumstances and social disgrace, served as powerful demonstration that beauty without character cannot secure lasting love, while genuine compatibility creates bonds that strengthen under pressure rather than dissolving when tested by adversity. Sebastian's daily gratitude for the circumstances that had prevented his marriage to the wrong woman, and led him instead to recognition of his true love, provided constant reminder that happiness often comes through unexpected paths when hearts are open to recognizing authentic worth beneath surface appearances and social expectations, that may conceal rather than reveal the qualities that matter most for lasting partnership between compatible souls.